The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We sometimes joke around about this phrase, the battle of ideas, and I don't know where it actually became popularized. I know that Dave Rubin on the Rubin Report uses it, and it's become sort of satirized in some ways. And I know that there are also other online movements that focus on free speech that talk about the battle of ideas. But I don't want to use it satirically here because I actually want to talk about something really serious that's going on. What I'm referring to when I talk about the movement around the battle of ideas and principles is sort of this philosophy, this overarching kind of de facto philosophy that has developed, where it's really popular to say what matters most, and arguably sometimes they say what matters exclusively, are the underlying principles that we stand for, and that policy is sort of secondary from that. It flows naturally from our principles and our ideas, but you have to first, before you can really talk about policy, have your principles and ideas straight, and that's the tough work, and the rest is sort of easy. And it often is applied by the extreme forms of libertarianism. It also applies sometimes, like one example would be there's this guy online called Carl Benjamin who started a movement around sort of naming and compiling the principles that so-called classic liberals or true liberals, as he refers to them, or something like that, what they stand for. And he's also been critical, actually, of some progressives for supposedly not even knowing what they stand for, that they're only focused on policy and they don't know what their principles are. And this movement that has an obsession with the principles and ideas is really, really misguided. And to be clear, I'm not saying principles are irrelevant and that ideas shouldn't be discussed and that it shouldn't be clear to one sort of what their guiding principles are. I think it's very important to understand what principles underlie our political philosophy, our life philosophy. It's absolutely a sort of anchor or a set of pillars upon which one can base more specific policy positions. Why would someone be for or against abortion? Well, you've got to understand sort of what principles and basic ideas are at play in your personal philosophy to then guide you in making that decision. But this movement has expanded into something that has actually become a replacement for making difficult decisions about policy when the principles conflict, which is almost all the time. Almost all the time, no set of principles is going to give you the answers to what it is that should happen in society, in the world of politics. This ideas movement overlaps in some ways, even though most of them don't know it. They have no idea that it does. It sort of overlaps with the positive, but with positivism, the movement of positivism, sort of overlaps with the principles of universalism, which assert that there are ideas with universal application without really needing to look at all the details of a particular situation. You've got your universal principles and they apply everywhere and give you the answers. And I believe that this ideas and principles movement is a cop-out. It's a cop-out from having to really figure out difficult realities that exist in the world. And I want to be clear, this is not some postmodernist cultural relativist woo, right? I'm not praising or criticizing postmodernism or cultural relativism in this segment. That's just not what this is, plain and simple. And I'll try to make it clearer with an example. Our friend Greg Stevens emailed me a good example of a couple months ago of this. Lots of these classical liberal, pseudo-libertarian types will often say that two of their guiding principles are the right to life and the right to property. And property usually includes both physical property and money, the money that you earned. All right, sounds good, right? Nice principles. So to have a right to life in society, you really need a police force to enforce that there's going to be a right to life through punishment for people who violate the right to life of others. As an example, if you're a police officer, you need to get paid because you need to eat, you need to live, you need to feed your family. So very quickly you see that to enforce the right to life of everybody, you need police and they need a salary. Well, okay, if you say we'll put a mandatory tax on people to pay for the police, well, according to many libertarians, you're violating the right to property because you are taking the earned money of people without their consent to pay for police. If you want to take a different approach, you say, well, this is a libertarian utopia, so you don't have to fund the police. People can choose to fund the police, but you only get police protection if you pay. Well, poor people might want to fund the police, but they can't afford to. So now, if you're poor, you don't get the same right to life that everybody else gets because you can't afford it. In modern Western societies, we've decided, okay, well, taxation to pay for the police is not optional, right? We've decided in Western democracies that it's more important to have police to defend our right to life and the police to protect everyone. And some of the freedom to decide what is done with 100% of your money has been removed. You are going to, if you are earning wages, pay for the police through taxation. How would the set of principles give us that answer, right? Remember, going back to our two principles, they were a right to life and a right to property. But as a society, the decision was made, we're going to take away a little bit of your right to property to prop up the right to life. There's no set of principles you can write down that will take into account the complicated realities of the real world, period. Thinking that your principles will give you the answer to every political question is ridiculous. And where it gets dangerous is that entire movements are being built around the idea of unwavering and fixed black and white principles, and people aren't doing the thinking anymore about the complexities of the real world. A lot of the so-called red-pilling online movement presents itself as sort of exposing you to knowledge instead of the sheltered ignorance that you've been living under for your whole life. But it's often selective narratives that will very frequently foment your belief in some, quite frankly, arbitrary set of principles without actually equipping you with the reality that you're going to need to deal with complicated and messy issues in the world. It's actually a form of pseudo-intellectualism in that by telling people that they're doing the hard and sophisticated work of establishing their principles, that they're really thinking hard. But the principles are actually the easy part. It's very easy to say our principles are freedom or equality or security or education or whatever, right? But the real thinking is applying the principles, especially when they conflict, which is almost all the time, in the real world. And I'd argue that that's the more difficult part that we should be focused on. Airport security, for example, right? We have a society where our principles, my philosophy is I value security and I value freedom. So what do you do about airport security? Which do you value more? In what proportions? Does the lack of freedom that we have as a result of TSA and no-fly lists and everything else that there is, does that loss of freedom equate to, or does it seem valuable to you in terms of the security that it might add, if we believe that it actually gives a security? Just the principles aren't going to get us anywhere, and people need to think way harder about real-world situations than the principles of security and freedom. When we're talking about abortion, except in cases of absolute and total religious dogma that is completely anti-abortion, which I would argue actually excuses you from really having to think hard, most people who have views on abortion that are somewhere on the spectrum actually need to evaluate multiple principles that guide them in their lives. These are not simple answers. And the idea that you're going to watch some YouTube videos and develop some philosophy with a list of 5, 10, or 15 principles, and then you don't really need to think hard about every issue that's out there because you're going to get all the answers from those principles is absolutely and totally misguided. And I think ultimately we are dumbing down the political debate through this movement, which claims to empower people to really think hard. It's a problem. I hope you'll send me your feedback and thoughts about what you think. I'm very worried about that movement. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. We will take a break and be back after this with plenty more.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Kelly Good. Kelly, thank you. You are a really good person. That's maybe my lowest pun on the program ever. Usually I leave those to Pat. But Kelly Good is a great member, I would say. Thank you, Kelly. Also, thanks to Glenn Crouch, who is a longtime sustaining member from basically the other side of the planet from us. Glenn is in Australia, and he has been a member since March of 2011. So thanks to Kelly, thanks to Glenn. You can join both of them at davidpakman.com/membership, and you can also support the program by making pledges of as little as one tiny singular dollar per month. We're talking about pennies per show if you contribute $1 per month at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. Okay, before we've done a bunch of different sort of giveaways and discounts and promos for membership on the program. We've had sometimes like a company will sponsor some free memberships or something like that. We've had that. We've had individuals who we thank and we say, Joe Smith from wherever has donated half of 10 memberships. And then sometimes we have a viewer or a member who wants to help us out anonymously. And that's what we have today. I haven't received any requests for recognition, but a longtime member has sponsored half of 20 memberships for new David Pakman Show members. He has already paid $30 each for 20 people to get memberships, meaning that 20 of you can pay just the other half of that $60 and get a half-price membership. And the best part of this is that this is not an infomercial style, low introductory price that then goes up and people lose their minds. You can keep the discounted rate for as long as you like. And 20 memberships for us, adding 20 members in one go, that's an important number for us, right? We are still in the growth phase of the David Pakman Show. So please email in. I want to make sure all 20 of these memberships are spoken for because a really supportive member has said, I'm going to contribute $600 so that you can then gather 600 from another 20 people through them paying half-price membership. So my only concern whenever we do this, Pat, people assume 20 memberships. Those are going to go in 10 minutes. I'm not even going to bother trying to get one, and then they don't email in, and then we might end up with a couple memberships left over for a full week. So don't assume someone else has spoken for these. Pat is not allowed to get any of these half-price memberships. I'm not taking any of them. I'm not giving any away to former producer Lewis or former TV director Gautam, also known as Natan Pakman, or any of those people. These are only reserved for you and preferably for new members. That's the deal.
I think I'm good on memberships. I have plenty of them myself.
Yeah, at this point.
And you got to credit this Good Samaritan.
I have no problem when people say, please acknowledge me. But I also think it's great when someone says, I don't need any acknowledgement. They just want to support the show. So there's only one way to get these half-price memberships. Email in through our website, okay? Go to davidpakman.com, click on contact, say, I'd like one of the half-price memberships, and I will get the first 20 people to email in coupon codes, and you will be good to go with the half-price membership. And very important, you keep the discount for as long as you keep the membership. The Democratic memo has been released. That's huge news if you know what the hell I'm talking about. And I don't want to assume that everybody does, so I'm going to give you the backstory. Now, I don't know how far back I should go in the backstory. I mean, I was born in 1984 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Skipping ahead a few years, I eventually started hosting this show. And I'll skip all the way up to a few weeks ago to catch you up, where Republican Congressman Devin Nunes claimed to have a blockbuster memo that would completely discredit Robert Mueller's Trump-Russia investigation. Ultimately, that memo was released. And it ended up being really not a huge deal. But if the allegations made by Devin Nunes were true, we would have supposed abuses of the FISA warrant process. And that includes for FISA warrants for surveillance on people like Carter Page. Devin Nunes alleging those were obtained incorrectly and on the basis of what he claimed was the discredited Christopher Steele dossier. Now, before we get into the Democratic memo, on the basis of the Nunes memo alone, we knew that he lied because we know that the Steele dossier has not been discredited, but rather has been partially corroborated. But okay, this was what Devin Nunes said. We know that Devin Nunes never saw the actual intelligence documents that his memo was supposedly written about. But okay, some of his colleagues supposedly did. So we were led to assume that, I guess, Devin Nunes knew what was in those intelligence documents, even though we don't know that. Then we learned that there is a Democratic memo, and we wonder, will it be released or won't it be released? There's a back and forth for several days or a week. And ultimately, we learned that it would not be released, either because Trump didn't want to release it or because it contained too much unredacted, classified information. But for whatever reason, we learned it would not be released until this weekend. The Democratic memo response to the Devin Nunes memo has now been released, and it directly refutes every single aspect of the Nunes memo. Now, to be clear, the Democratic memo refutes the Nunes memo, but that doesn't tell us whether either memo tells the truth. The memos disagree, and I'm going to talk more about that later because that's an important part of this. But let's start with what the Democratic memo says. Here are the major highlights. Number one, the Democratic memo denies that the Steele dossier was the basis for the Carter Page investigation. In fact, according to Democrats, the Carter Page investigation started before the FBI received the Steele dossier. And if you believe time to sort of move forward as we have a conventional understanding of it, it would then be impossible for the Steele dossier to be the basis for the investigation into Carter Page. And in fact, the Democratic memo points out that Carter Page has a long history with Russia that warranted investigation and that he had been investigated before. And previously, it alleges that Carter Page also lied in testimony to the two lawmakers about meetings that he had with Russians. So big picture, number one, the Democratic memo says we had many reasons to be investigating Carter Page that had nothing to do with the Steele dossier. And we started that investigation before the FBI started that investigation before they even had the Steele dossier. The Dem memo also argues that the processes that were used to get those FISA warrants were totally on the up and up, both in terms of who approved them and the information that they contained. The Dem memo denies that Christopher Steele was paid by the Department of Justice for the dossier, which is another right-wing talking point that the memo allegedly debunks based on the assertions that it makes. And it actually mentions that there is independent corroboration of elements of the Steele dossier. I believe this hurts Republicans even more than if neither of these memos had been released. And I encourage you to read it for yourself. It's only 10 pages. But the main points are, it says the opposite of what the Nunes memo said. Remember that Nunes himself never saw the intelligence he was supposedly describing in his memo. But more importantly, we now have the first official statement, to the extent that a letter from a Democratic congressman is an official statement, that says information in the Steele dossier has been corroborated outside of that dossier. Now, let me get to the part of which memo do we believe. I've just told you what the Dem memo alleges. Let's all be skeptical news consumers. If you believe neither memo, or you at least question both because you recognize that both the Nunes memo and the Democratic memo are both politically motivated memos, good for you, number one. But then what do we go to? If we can't ascertain the veracity of the memos, since the underlying intelligence is classified or not available to us, what can we do? I would presume that unless we have actual evidence that the FBI acted inappropriately, I would presume we still believe the FBI acted appropriately, right? Because what we have essentially are two political memos, one saying the FBI acted inappropriately without actually supplying us with the information that would confirm that, and then we have a counterpoint memo from Democrats saying the FBI acted completely appropriately. we don't actually have evidence that the FBI acted inappropriately. And thus, I think our default still is the FBI is doing an investigation and they're acting appropriately, and FISA warrants have to be approved, and they're not unilaterally signing off on these things themselves. Now, if you don't believe the Democratic memo, but you believe the Nunes memo, I would just ask you why, right? Why do you believe the Nunes memo, which contained no actual evidence but just assertions, and Devin Nunes didn't even see the intelligence he claimed to be citing, but then you don't believe the Democratic memo? That doesn't really make sense to me. And further, this has even more intensely backfired for Republicans because the Steele memo is framed as being partially corroborated. And every time I mention this, Pat, you get the online trolls and you get the cottage industry of people who like to just do attack videos on the David Pakman Show saying, Pakman is lying that Trump urinated on Russian prostitutes. I never said that that piece of the Russian dossier has been corroborated, but there are many elements that have been, and they relate to Carter Page, they relate to Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, etc. The question I come away with after reading the Democratic memo is, if only 10% of the Democratic memo is accurate, why hasn't Carter Page been indicted yet? And that may well be one of the next shoes to drop on this thing. Send me your thoughts. I think it is fascinating how this memo has backfired on Republicans. They release a memo that has very little meat, for lack of going back to the nothing burger motif. And then now, if the Democratic memo is accurate, it looks really, really bad for people like Devin Nunes. Send me your thoughts. You can discuss this and any other topics from today's show on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We've now learned that we do not have to guess how the Parkland, Florida shooting might have gone differently had there been a good guy with a gun there, because we've learned that there was a presumably, supposedly good guy with a gun there. Scot Peterson was the school resource deputy who was armed and in uniform that day, and Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel has now told reporters that Scot Peterson was at the school, he was armed, but he stood by as the violence unfolded, saying, quote, "What I saw was a deputy arrive at the west side of Building 12, take up a position, and never went in." And now Scot Peterson is being investigated for his lack of action. Now, of course, the reality is that any investigation that is going on here, no matter what the investigation turns up, these situations are really complex. I am not going to even attempt in this story to defend Scot Peterson or to criticize Scot Peterson, the armed deputy. But what I want to criticize is the idea that the best way to stop the bad guy with the gun is the good guy with the gun. The armed school resource deputy clearly did not serve as a deterrent to the shooter in Parkland, Florida. And once the shooting started, the good guy with the gun also did nothing to stop the incident. Now, whatever the reason was, and maybe the investigation will eventually give us an answer to that, this is something that would happen in many of these situations. We learned after the Las Vegas shooting of 2017, there were multiple supposed good guys with guns there. They had no clue where to shoot because it's chaos in these situations. And a couple of them actually spoke to media and said, rightly so, I realized I couldn't do anything with my gun. It was of no use to me to have that gun there as a good guy.
Yeah, it's a good thing that they didn't fire back, because then they'd just be blasting the hotel and
Absolutely.
Firing indiscriminately.
Aurora movie theater shooting, another example. People talk about, oh, the movie theater was a gun-free zone, so it's an attractive target. Well, we know that there being guns in a place has not been a deterrent to shootings. And how on earth would more guns in a dark and loud movie theater have helped anybody bring that situation to a better resolution when you start discharging a gun in the dark with insane ricocheting echo? It makes absolutely no sense. But what I want to talk about now is that Donald Trump and many others are smearing this armed deputy, Scot Peterson. Donald Trump actually called Peterson a coward by saying he lacked the courage and then asking maybe people are cowards sometimes. Here is Donald Trump talking about it.
Deputy Sheriff Peterson, I guess his name is. I mean, they brought it out. I was surprised. But it deserves to be brought out. What he did, he's trained his whole life. There's an example. But when it came time to get in there and do something, he didn't have the courage or something happened. But he certainly did a poor job. There's no question about that. He was there for 5 minutes. For 5 minutes. That was during the entire shooting. He heard it right at the beginning. So he certainly did a poor job. But that's a case where somebody was outside, they're trained, they didn't react properly under pressure, or they were cowards. It was a real shot to the police department.
Cowards. Maybe they were cowards. And MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell put it really well in a tweet, actually. And so I'll quote him, Lawrence O'Donnell from MSNBC, saying, "The president who did not run towards the sound of guns in Vietnam 50 years ago now labels an officer with a handgun a coward for not running towards the sound of an AR-15. Trump is by far the most cowardly president in history." I don't know about that, but what I do know is Trump is the last guy who should be talking about anyone's courage. For Trump, courage would be, I don't know, not ordering another bucket of KFC for the flight home. That takes real courage for Donald Trump. And the big takeaway is that using all of this to try to arm teachers is a disaster, and we've got to prevent that from happening. As Trump said, a lifelong trained deputy didn't fix the situation with his gun. So how on earth are we supposed to believe that a school teacher is going to take out shooters without causing more chaos? Never mind a student potentially taking a teacher's gun and using it to shoot people, or a teacher going off and committing a mass shooting themselves at a school. And imagine a scenario where there is a shooter, or at least a teacher thinks there's a shooter at the school, and that teacher, in an attempt to stop what they believe is a shooter, shoots the wrong kid or a random kid, and then the parents sue and the entire thing implodes. Or when the teacher is trying to take out the shooter and police show up and see the teacher with a gun and think, oh, that's the bad guy or the bad gal with the gun, and the police shoot the teacher, who I guess is trying to defend the children. Or when multiple teachers have guns and they start shooting each other. It's this delusional fantasy to think that this is a good idea. If you think about it at the 30,000-foot level, and that's clearly all Trump is sort of capable of, you end up with ideas like, hey, well, hold on. If only we had more people at the school to stop the shooter. Hey, schools have teachers. Let's give them guns. As soon as you start envisioning actual scenarios, similar to the Aurora movie theater shooting, where people say, hey, gun-free zone, there were no guns in there to prevent the shooting. Well, if you have a handgun and it's a dark movie theater and you hear a gunshot, you can't identify what direction it's coming from. How would that have actually helped? Once you get into the details, Pat, I feel like it becomes much more clear that armed teachers is, if anything, an acutely bad idea, never mind a neutral or good one.
Yeah, and now you have some on the right who are even criticizing this idea that arming teachers will be the solution to mass shootings in schools. But do you think that the Lawrence O'Donnell comparison was correct or adequate to make?
Well, listen, I mean, being drafted to war and doing what you can to avoid that is not the same thing as if you are hired to provide armed security and you don't go. It's not the exact same thing. The problem I have is that what I like about it is it does go to Trump's pattern of constantly calling out the valor of others while clearly being a guy who has just lived an entire life with a, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, was able to basically buy his way out of Vietnam, but thinks he's the authority on patriotism and courage.
Yeah, I just feel that if you're drafted into the military, the expectation is that you are opted in, and then you could opt out if you have deferments or you're a conscientious objector.
But that was a draft, right? At the time, it was not just, oh, if you want to join, you join. It was Trump was going to be drafted, and it appears as though it was a friend of his dad's who got him this note about his bone spurs. It's not just sort of like, it's not the volunteer military scenario.
But the expectation is that you have to go in unless you have a reason to go out of it, to opt out of it.
Yes.
Whereas if you're signing up to be a sheriff's deputy or a law enforcement officer, that's your choice, and you have to take on the risks that go along with that position.
I don't disagree with you. It is not a perfect analogy, but I think it does go to Trump being the self-proclaimed authority on patriotism and courage and American values, while basically representing the exact opposite. So in that sense, I think it does point out some of the double standard inherent in Donald Trump. I believe that without question, the most spotted, the most controversial David Pakman Show bumper sticker is one that's driving around on the back of a car in the Knoxville, Tennessee area. And this has actually come up before. People have written in before from different parts of Tennessee saying, hey, I saw a David Pakman Show bumper sticker on the back of a car. I know one was in Knoxville. I think another one might have been some other part of Tennessee. I don't know if Knoxville is part of the Tri-Cities area. I don't really know my Tennessee geography very well.
Johnson City, Knoxville, and Roanoke, Virginia, or something like that.
Oh, that's the Tri-City area. Oh, I didn't even know that one of the three cities was not actually in
Or maybe it's
Tennessee.
Bristol, Tennessee.
Bristol, Tennessee.
That border town.
Okay. In any case, there have been David Pakman Show bumper stickers spotted in Tennessee, and I believe it's the same bumper sticker because I've gone back to the records, and we've not really shipped that many bumper stickers to Tennessee. And there was at one point someone who wrote in saying, I actually rolled my window down and talked to the driver who I saw with the David Pakman Show bumper sticker in the Knoxville, Tennessee area. And at the time, and I'm going from memory, but I think that the person who has the bumper sticker in Knoxville, Tennessee, wrote in and said, hey, that's me. Yeah, I don't remember what type of car it was, but that's me. And I looked for that email and I couldn't find it. It has happened again. Once again, the Knoxville, Tennessee bumper sticker has been spotted by another viewer. And there was a Reddit discussion thread started, which was called, I spotted a David Pakman bumper sticker. Today, I spotted a David Pakman bumper sticker in my local parking garage. I thought it was pretty cool because I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is a very conservative place. This is great. I absolutely love this. And we've actually, we recently sold a lot of bumper stickers because we had a story where a viewer of ours, Ryan, in upstate New York, covered over an Alex Jones InfoWars bumper sticker with a David Pakman Show bumper sticker. And that has created a deluge of orders of bumper stickers. People saying, David, I also am aware of an InfoWars bumper sticker or of a Fox News bumper sticker, and I'm going to be covering it up and sending you pictures, which is fantastic. My only concern about all of the bumper sticker stuff, and I probably shouldn't be mentioning this if we want to keep selling bumper stickers, but I want to be honest, is that someone's car is going to end up vandalized if they do drive around with David Pakman Show bumper stickers. And as knowledge of the program continues to grow, the probability that the bumper sticker is spotted by someone who really doesn't like the show goes up. And in any case, get your bumper stickers online at davidpakman.com/gear. But should we be concerned about that?
If there's like an InfoWars sticker somewhere already on a piece of public property or maybe private property, but it's like industrial,
okay,
I think it's okay then to take a David Pakman Show bumper sticker and cover it up.
Morally, you're saying?
Morally, that's okay.
Okay.
But don't go to someone's car.
Oh, no. But I want to be super clear. All of the people that are talking about covering other bumper stickers with David Pakman Show bumper stickers, not a single person has suggested that they're going to do it on another vehicle. And that I am against that. I believe that that is probably some kind of vandalism and against the law. And don't do that. Don't do that. But what I do want to tell you is that black and white bumper stickers are now available at davidpakman.com/gear. And please go there. And when you go to davidpakman.com/gear, you will see that the bumper stickers are available along with all sorts of other new gear, including coffee mugs like what I have here, Patriot Mail t-shirts, hoodies, coffee, all sorts of great stuff. And please, if you do put the bumper sticker on some kind of interesting place or cover another bumper sticker, make sure to take before and after pictures because that's likely to make the show. It is very likely that that's something that we would talk about. davidpakman.com/gear. And congratulations to the person in Knoxville because that is one of, I would argue, the most spotted David Pakman Show bumper sticker in the world, at least as far as I've heard. So that's a really, really great thing. That's it for this segment. Let's take a break. We will go to a quick break and be back with plenty more after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So we had this absolutely horrific Parkland, Florida mass school shooting, took nearly 20 lives. And in the wake of that, the NRA continues to be out there talking about more guns in school and more guns in more places. And maybe, hopefully, I would say, this time Americans are so sick of this disgusting gun lobby that works solely for the gun makers and not for the people and not for gun safety, but merely to sell as many guns as possible. Hopefully this time, the counter movement will actually have an effect. And at least early on, it appears that some of the calls for boycotts are starting to work. Delta Airlines got a lot of attention for saying that they are going to be ending their partnership with the National Rifle Association, where people going to the NRA conference get discounts on flights. Can you imagine anything more disgusting? But there's actually more companies other than just Delta that are bailing, and I'm going to tell you about a couple of them. First, here is Delta's announcement on Twitter, where Delta said, Delta is reaching out to the NRA to let them know we will be ending their contract for discounted rates through our group travel program. We will be requesting that the NRA remove our information from their website. Now, I've said before, I've tended not to fly Delta in general, mostly because it's not that convenient when you live in Boston, but also because they're pretty anti-union, but lots of airlines are anti-union. And this is a good thing, and at least this decision is something that the Delta should be commended for. United Airlines, which I use more often than Delta, is also bailing, tweeting, United is notifying the NRA that we will no longer offer a discounted rate to their annual meeting, and we are asking that the NRA remove our information from their website. And American Airlines, which I fly most often living in Boston, saying in no uncertain terms that they have no partnership with the NRA. To clarify questions we have received today, they tweeted, American does not offer discounted group travel rates to the NRA. It's not just airlines. 2 car rental companies jumping on board. Hertz saying that they have notified the NRA that they are ending their car discount program with Hertz. And Alamo Car Rental saying we ended the program effective March 26th. It's not just airlines and car rental companies. It is also hotels. Wyndham Hotels tweeting to a woman named Elaine who inquired, please know Wyndham is no longer affiliated with the NRA. The First National Bank of Omaha, of which I am a customer, also tweeting, customer feedback has caused us to review our relationship with the NRA. As a result, First National Bank of Omaha will not renew its contract with the National Rifle Association to issue the NRA Visa card. That's going to be a big hit, right? The gun nuts really like having their NRA credit card that they can use everywhere. This is good. Okay, these public shame campaigns are very effective. It was effective against Breitbart. We covered that over the last year and a half. And this happened because people like you went online, they found a list of the partnerships that different companies have with the NRA, and they started tweeting at those brands saying, drop the association with the NRA. Now, there's a counter argument here, right? Which is, David, listen, it's good that the partnerships are ending, but it's not because of shame that these corporations are ending their NRA partnerships. It's loss of revenue that they are worried about. And I have 2 thoughts on that. Number one, I don't know if that's true, right? Because when you do this, the pro-gun crowd is now saying, well, we're going to counter boycott Delta, and we're going to counter boycott Wyndham Hotels and United Airlines and whoever else. So I don't know that these brands can necessarily calculate whether this is going to be a net financial gain or loss for them. But I would take it a step further. Either way, ending these partnerships is good. If it's the threat of loss of revenue rather than the public shame that gets companies like Hertz and Alamo and American and United to say, we don't have partnerships with the NRA, I'll still take it, right? I still think it's good and that we should be happy that that's going on. And I was actually thinking about different sort of boycott campaigns recently. The campaign from the left against the NRA has already been way more successful than the right-wing campaign against the NFL and associated companies over allowing players to kneel during the national anthem. And I was thinking about how the right-wing boycotts often fail. The NFL stuff really hasn't had much of an impact. They wanted to boycott the Hamilton Broadway play. When was it, Pat, that Pence was booed? Was it before?
During the transition, maybe?
During the transition,
Yeah.
right? It was before the inauguration, I think. And then right-wingers said, boycott Hamilton. Record Hamilton attendance continues, and ticket prices are through the roof. They wanted to boycott the newest Star Wars movie. Not the newest actual Star Wars movie, but remember Rogue One
Yes,
that was out there?
yes.
Because they right-wingers believed it was indirectly criticizing the Trump administration. That failed. The movie did really, really well. So we do have some silver linings here, that some of the good boycotts seem to be working and some of the bogus right-wing boycotts seem to be failing.
It's hard to say at this point whether or not the NRA boycott's going to succeed or fail. But what's clear is that the NRA definitely miscalculated. If after all these shootings they came out with the most simple gun reform measures and were in support of basic things like background checks, I don't think these companies would have boycotted them.
Probably not. And I think part of that was timing, right? Because the NRA is a staple at CPAC, and Wayne LaPierre spoke. It was at CPAC over the weekend that Wayne LaPierre spoke. And oftentimes the move by the NRA is to not even be visible publicly for a while after each shooting. And I don't know if it's weeks or months or whatever. But when I saw Wayne LaPierre speaking at CPAC, it just felt too soon. Their move is disappear, evaporate like they don't exist for a little bit, and then come back a little bit later. But they are front and center. And that's actually what I want to talk about next, which is how prominent NRA advertising has been since this shooting. In the days since the Parkland, Florida shooting, I have received dozens of emails, and there have been hundreds of comments across YouTube and Twitter from viewers who have noticed NRA ads are playing in front of David Pakman Show YouTube videos. And this is getting so prevalent that I thought it was going to be useful to talk about it and to sort of explain what it is that we know is going on and what we don't know, right? And so first of all, as a baseline, we do not control what ads play on our videos, right? It's determined by the content of the video and the targeting that the advertiser is doing, which can include a geographical targeting as well, right? So when we are in election season, our Massachusetts YouTube viewers will see ads for people running in Massachusetts, whereas our California YouTube viewers see ads for people running there. Secondly, we have no reason to believe that the NRA is specifically buying ads on David Pakman Show videos. I believe it would be possible to do that given the YouTube ad platform. We have no reason to think that's going on because there's actually NRA ads appearing on lots of progressive YouTube channels. More than likely, the NRA is buying ads on videos that are, for example, news and politics videos that include words like guns, shooting, firearms, NRA in the metadata, meaning either in the title, in the description, or in the tags for the video. Then we get to some of the more interesting questions that people are asking. Like, for example, is the NRA ramping up YouTube advertising right now in response to the Parkland shooting? In other words, are they more aggressive in promoting gun sales right after the Parkland, Florida shooting? I don't know the answer to that, right? If they're simply targeting news and politics channels with the word guns, what's going on is there are more videos right now talking about guns and firearms and the NRA and gun safety because of the Parkland shooting. So it might be that you're noticing more NRA ads on YouTube because you're watching more videos related to firearms, and that's exactly what they target, right? And it could be that this is a campaign that they've been running for a while, and there's just more gun-related content right now. The other question is, and this is the more interesting one to me, is the NRA targeting progressive, liberal, and left-wing channels more broadly with the idea of starting to appeal or trying to appeal to the American left? I don't know the answer to that, right? It is a known marketing technique, and I've even tried it on Facebook with Facebook ads. When we run Facebook ads, we can target different audiences, and on Facebook, you can really specifically fine-tune the audience you're looking for. And my idea was, let's compare the response and engagement rates of targeting David Pakman Show videos to liberal audiences, where we're sort of more preaching to the choir, versus targeting David Pakman Show videos to conservatives. Because my idea was, if someone sees a video on Facebook that they really disagree with and are angered by, it might trigger a higher rate of sharing and commenting than if we target the liberal audience. It didn't end up working out, right? Like we did worse, not surprisingly, but I was curious about it, targeting a right-wing audience on Facebook than we do targeting a left-wing audience on Facebook. But it's possible that the NRA might be toying around with this, right? Because I'm hearing from progressives that they are seeing NRA ads across a big cross-section of progressive YouTube channels. And I have no idea whether the NRA is deliberately targeting left-wingers. And there's one other angle here, which is called retargeting. And retargeting is an online advertising technology that sort of follows you through different websites. So without getting too technical, if you go to like bhphotovideo.com and you look at a Canon camera, right? And then later you're on Facebook and you see an ad for that exact same Canon camera you were looking at on the BH Photo Video website, that's an example of retargeting. It could be that the reason people are seeing more NRA ads on YouTube is not actually because of our content, but because they've been reading news articles about the Parkland shooting, for example, which might be triggering an NRA retargeting on YouTube, possibly, right? So big picture, we have no control over this. We have no reason to think the NRA is targeting the David Pakman Show audience. We're not sure whether they're targeting progressives, but what we do know is that as a result of this overall, the topic of guns is more in the discussion than it has been for a very long time. And overall, the NRA is running a lot of ads on YouTube because there is so much content based around that. One thing that's good is that the NRA showing their ads to our viewers is going to give them a lower return since a lot of our audience hates the NRA. So it's nice that the NRA is wasting a little bit of money on ads on our channel. That's the silver lining here, if there is one at all. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 2192-DAVID-P. Very interested to hear that the former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, actually called in, and he had a message. He had a whole agenda he wanted to espouse to our audience. Take a listen.
David, this is Arnold Schwarzenegger calling. I was watching your show and I saw you told the story about being on the airplane and the little baby in the seat behind you giving you a hard time and kicking the seats, and how you turned around and you did this Seinfeld eye roll. Let me tell you, you need to watch my movie Kindergarten Cop.
Right.
In Kindergarten Cop, the little boy was kicking my seat. So I turned around to him and I took a pencil and I said, hey, if you don't quit screwing around back there, this is what I'm going to do to you. And I broke the pencil in half. That's what you need to do. Mm-hmm. Don't be such a girly man. Anyway, love your show. You guys are great. Say hi to Pat for me.
Right.
Okay, bye.
Are you surprised to hear? Because I don't think Arnold is an advocate of the vegan lifestyle. Is it surprising to you that he has come out so forcefully in favor of producer Pat?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
He's not a big fan of the vegan lifestyle?
Well, I don't think he lives it. Let me put it that way.
Probably not.
Where do we even go with this?
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine Arnold flying economy. That's one thing for sure.
Have you seen Kindergarten Cop? I
Never.
haven't seen it. I mean,
Never.
it doesn't seem like it's that hard to break a pencil in half. Like, I can do that, and I don't have the strength of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right. After all, you are a soy boy, as many in the audience have told us. And now I'm a soy boy as well.
By association?
That's the new insult, by association, apparently, yeah. Okay, we've got a great bonus show for you today. A lot of great stories, one including circumcision, which is a hot-button topic all the time. On the program, we will talk about airport bins to toss out marijuana and lots of other stuff. But this is all on the bonus show. And in order to hear these stories, you've got to get access to the bonus show, which you can do one of two ways. Number one, become a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Number two, become a patron for at least $5 a month at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. And lastly, get your David Pakman Show coffee mugs, now available for Covfefe, green tea, espresso, whatever you want to put in this thing, I'm fine with. Get it at davidpakman.com/gear and check out all of our other great stuff, bumper stickers, hoodies, Patriot Mail t-shirts, etc., etc. Oh, I'm not supposed to say etc. The audience has asked that I never say etc.
Oh, pronounced it correctly.
At least I did this time. All right, talk to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.